what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome, I'm Matsuma Katauga and you're watching the China Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The death toll from the high-rise apartment complex fire in Hong Kong has now risen to 94 people, with 76 injured as rescuers launched full-scale operations across 7 burned buildings, as early investigations indicated the use of non-compliant, highly flammable materials. China has warned that the Taiwan issue is an internal affair after a report claimed US President Donald Trump urged Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi to temper her tone on Taiwan, a claim Tokyo firmly denied, as Japan dismissed the Wall Street Journal report from yesterday as false. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will not be joining French President Emmanuel Macron on his upcoming 3-day visit to China next week, marking a break from recent EU-China diplomatic tradition, as Macron will hold bilateral talks alone with Xi on the future of EU-China relations and will later brief EU partners on the outcome. Canada plans to advance ties with China at a rapid pace, said Ambassador Jennifer May, confirming Prime Minister Mark Carney has accepted Beijing's invitation for a future visit. Officials from both sides said last month's leaders' meeting turned a turning point. Taiwan's leader William Lai faces criticism after suggesting Beijing could complete unification by force by the year 2027. With opponents accusing him of stoking fear and pushing Taiwan towards a wartime footing without consensus. His office has later claimed the 2027 date was only a U.S. source capability benchmark amid heightening tensions. China's defense spokesperson Jiang Bin has stated that the Hawaii meetings of the China-US MMCA held in November has added positivity and stability to bilateral military ties based on equality, mutual respect, and peaceful coexistence. Beijing said the talks improved communication to reduce misunderstandings and miscalculation as well as risks. China has released a new white paper on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, stating that Beijing is a builder of world peace and a key promoter of global security governance in areas including outer space, cyberspace, and artificial intelligence. The document calls on all nations to work together to safeguard global peace and security. IMO Secretary General Arsenio Dominguez has said that China has a big role in global maritime cooperation. He further added that China's new permanent mission to the 176-member IMO reinforces its commitment to decarbonization, safety, and seafarer training in the global shipping sector. Now we start with the headlines Now we start with Hong Kong. Authorities have reported that the death toll from the city's worst fire in decades has now risen to at least 94 people. With several hundred still missing, the blaze, which engulfed a high-rise complex in the northern district of Tai Po, has almost been extinguished after raging for more than 24 hours. At least 76 people were injured, including 11 firefighters. Officials have opened an investigation into the cause of fire, focusing on renovation work at the site, which included bamboo scaffolding and plastic mesh. 3 men have been arrested in connection with the incident. Residents described a chaotic scene, with no fire alarms heard and many having to go door to door to alert their neighbors. Key members of the firefighting team have provided updates on the efforts to contain the fire. Let's listen in.
Our firefighting operation is almost complete. Despite that, we are still carrying out firefighting operation to 4 individual units, and damping down to various units of the 7 blocks are still in progress, so as to prevent the debris and embers from flaring up. What's next is the search and rescue operation. We will conduct search and operation to the the remaining 25 assistance corps, and at the same time, we will endeavor to effect forcible entry to all the units of the 7 blocks concerned, so as to ensure that there are no other possible casualties.
FSD has deployed 177 ambulances responding to scene. Till now, we have already handled 155 casualties. Among them, 79 casualties were confirmed fatalities at scene. We have sent all the rest of casualties to hospital. During the firefighting operation, we have 11 fire personnel injured. They are now all in stable condition. However, unfortunately, we have 1 fire personnel confirmed died in the fire operation.
Now we welcome Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent Chinese strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us again. Good to see you. Andrew, what more has happened, or what has come out of the ongoing investigation on this fire from Hong Kong ever since we last talked about this?
First of all, I think the Hong Kong people and the Hong Kong government remain very grateful for the international expression of support, including the Pope, including President Putin, of course, the China's presidency, and then there is a huge amount of civil society action trying to alleviate the grief and the difficulties of people affected. Now, as far as the investigations are concerned, first of all, the fire is now perfectly under control after so many hours of burning. But then the initial investigations revealed there has been problematic areas surrounding the fire, particularly the use of inflammable material for the scaffolding that covered the building while the buildings were under renovation. And this scaffolding were found not to match standards, fire retardant standards. So there is a question of culpability on the part of the contractors, but also possibility, culpability on the part of the authorities overseeing these safety measures. But there is a huge amount of relief effort in the local NGOs and volunteers. Huge amounts of money has been donated, and various other materials delivered on the site, involving a lot of sort of individual volunteers, expressing as kind of solidarity amongst the people of Hong Kong.
Right. And, also we saw that 3 individuals were taken or are taken into questioning. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, of course, the people, the contractors who were responsible for installing this scaffolding, together with the use of the substandard materials, are primarily responsible. So they were quickly arrested by the police and charged with gross negligence and manslaughter. But then there are further investigations into what's behind these companies, so that computers and various files were seized and searched, and the whole thing is still under investigation. So there's one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is to, again, comprehensive review of similar scaffolding and materials used in other construction sites in Hong Kong. So that has already commenced and is in full swing. Thirdly, it's also reviewing the kind of safety standards, how that they're enforced, and the long-term consideration of replacing some of these methods, including this bamboo scaffolding with metal. But then on that question, there are similar other problems because the metal can be easily heated up to a very high level, and the bamboos themselves are very flexible. And then the fire the fire which has occurred show that the bamboos themselves were not the main cause of the fire, but rather the materials. So I think that these investigations and and um, and discussions are still carrying on between the government, the authorities, as well as the academia and experts, including those outside China. I mean, there are other institutions involved in looking into these materials and so on and so forth. So I think that this could be very helpful in preventing similar incidents happening either in Hong Kong or elsewhere around the
Yes,
world.
indeed, hopefully that helps. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for sharing that insight from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus on to Taiwan. In Taiwan, opposition critics have accused Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-te of stroking fair on the island with his suggestion that Beijing could be preparing to take Taiwan over by force by 2027. According to the opposition, Lai's attempt to justify a massive increase in defense spending was nudging Taiwan towards a wartime footing without consensus or clarity. Meanwhile, spokeswoman for Lai's office, Karen Kuo, insists that 2027 is not a confirmed invasion date, but a capability benchmark cited in U.S. congressional and think tank assessments. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent Chinese strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for staying with us. Now, Andrew, looking at this, how justified or how common is it for leaders to cite foreign intelligence or think tank assessments, such as now U.S. evaluations of China's military timeline was suggested by Taiwanese leader? How is this seen?
Well, the 2027 kind of problem has been a very popular misconception, a very dangerous one, because it completely misunderstands what Beijing is trying to achieve. Of course, President Xi did mention 2027, but merely as a target day, whereby the People's Liberation Army, the Air Force, the Navy would be fully prepared to mount an undefeatable kind of deterrence against any possible declaration of independence. Because any declaration of independence by Taiwan or other foreign forces helping towards that end would contravene the China Anti-Secession Act enacted by Beijing decades ago to prevent this possibility. So the 2027 is merely a target date to get the China's armed forces prepared against this eventuality. It's not by no means a target date for military action, because the preference has always been for peaceful unification, enshrined by 3 white papers on the subject issued by Beijing over the past 2 decades, the last coinciding with the provocative visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Now, the unification, because most Taiwanese people do not support unification, nor do they want to declare independence because of these consequences. And then, of course, according to the latest survey in Taiwan, only coming out a couple of days ago, suggesting that as much as 52% of the Taiwanese do not, repeat, not want to defend Taiwan if push comes to the shove, but because they know that they can't possibly risk their lives for something which is not likely to happen. Now, but as far as Beijing is concerned, the Taiwan strategy, unification strategy, has been enunciated by President Xi a number of times. The preference is for peaceful unification. The deadline for that because the situation cannot be allowed to carry on. Otherwise, the Taiwan would eventually drift towards a separation. So the deadline is 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But then the strategy is three-pronged. Firstly, military deterrence, as I've just explained, making sure that there are no efforts which dare to declare some sort of a formal independence. Secondly, economic and diplomatic pressure. Very few countries now recognize Taiwan as a separate country. Of course, Taiwan has always been part of China, dating back to the Ming Dynasty in the 13th century. And also, the United Nations now has recognized only the People's Republic of China, representing the whole China. And the One China policy has been always upheld by the United States under the Taiwan Relations Act, which continue authorizes the supply of arms for Taiwan to defend themselves. The so-called three communiques and the six assurances, saying that confirming that the United States does not have any position on the future of Taiwan, supports the solution through peaceful means, but of course opposes the use of military force to alter the status quo. Now, along in this kind of dynamics, the three-pronged strategy seems to be working. I mentioned the military deterrence. I mentioned the economic and diplomatic pressures, but also people-to-people exchanges as the people in both countries increasingly interact peacefully in terms of tourism on both sides. The mainlanders visiting Taiwan, the Taiwanese visiting China, and as many as 300,000 Taiwanese, together with members of the family, are already living and working on the mainland on their businesses. And there are more and more opportunities opening up on the mainland for Taiwanese young people. For example, in tourism, in arts, in culture, cinemas, and restaurants. So I think that this momentum is being sustained.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Andrew K.P. Long for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving on, French President Emmanuel Macron will be traveling to China next week without any accompanying European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, marking a significant break from recent tradition. Macron has included EU leaders in several previous meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping, part of an effort to Europeanize his approach to Beijing. Von der Leyen has accompanied Macron during high-level engagements in Paris and Beijing last year. However, according to reports next week, there will be no EU leader present for any portion of Macron's two-stop, three-day tour of China. This will be organized as a strictly bilateral one. Reports also suggests that Macron will hold an important conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the future of EU-China relations and will report back to his European partners afterwards. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. Thank you very much, Andrew, for staying with us. Now, Andrew, looking at this, looking at the history, Macron has always met Xi Jinping with a company, either German Chancellor, even Angela Merkel and von der Leyen. Why do you think suddenly EU leader is not accompanying him this time?
Well, I think that both Europe and the main European countries are facing pressures on two major fronts. On the one hand, the American transatlantic alliance seems to have fractured, with the United States imposing heavy tariffs on its long traditional allies in Europe, including the UK and France and Germany. And then the American alliance seems to be much less reliable compared with before, including, of course, President Trump's unilateral action on solving the Ukraine war behind the Europeans' back, as it were, and coming up with a formula negotiated directly with President Putin behind the Europeans' back, and trying to force the Europeans to accept this deal. And of course, the Europeans want to push back, but on the other hand, they may have overestimated the capacity of doing so, because for years they have outsourced their defense to the United States, and then even for the UK, for example, the total number of tanks number less than 100, because they're spending all their money on improving their welfare. Rather than pushing up the defense. And then after so many years, and this American ally seems to be less reliable than they thought, and they cannot just switch overnight, then build up their own capabilities. So they're trying to recalibrate the relationship with Beijing, and trying to explore the China market a bit more. Not that they would embrace Beijing entirely, but that is a recalibration of the relationship. But on the other hand, the Ukraine problem is coming up close and personal, and President Trump has already imposed a deadline, forcing the European allies and Ukraine to accept the deal, which was secretly negotiated between him and President Putin. So I think that there are crises on both fronts, and hence the inability of all the leaders to go to China altogether. But on the other one hand, there is a definite movement towards recalibrating relations with China, both from France, Germany, and the other European countries, because of this trauma that they're now facing with their relationship and long-term reliance on the United States as a staunch partner, and that partnership seems to have fractured.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for joining us today as an independent Chinese strategist from Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Now we move on to China. China has announced a detailed strategy to better match the supply and demand of consumer goods as part of its latest effort to leverage its vast domestic market and support long-term economic growth. The plan, released by the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology along with 5 other government departments, outlines the measures to develop new consumption areas such as smart homes and green construction materials, boost the modernization of consumer goods in rural regions, and expand the supply of items including winter sports equipment, popular toys, and products for both infants and older adults. China will coordinate the expansion of domestic demand and the deepening of supply-side structural reform as per the plan, noting that consumption's rate of contribution to economic growth will increase steadily by 2030. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Jayant Menon. He's a senior fellow at ISEAS. Joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking at this, how might China's strategy to boost domestic consumption, especially in emerging sectors, how do you think this would reshape the balance between state planning and market forces in its economy?
This move to rebalance the drivers of growth is not new. We've been here before when it comes to China in particular. The first attempt was soon after the global financial crisis of 2007-8, where these huge imbalances were first raised as a potential source of instability. And China announced then that it was hoping to rebalance its economy, and it has been trying to do so, but with limited success. But now things are quite different once again. The urgency is much greater, partly because the world now is turning somewhat inward with the rise in nationalism led by the US protectionism under President Trump. And so there is a greater need now to actually turn towards domestic sources of growth. Consumption growth is already around half of all growth as a contributor, but it needs to increase further. And the shift out of investment towards more consumption and less reliance on net exports is what is required, given the uncertain environment globally, and also China's wish to become more internally driven, and therefore more resilient to these sorts of external pressures.
And Dr. Jayant, as you building on your answer, to what extent could China's emphasis on expanding domestic demand, how do you think this would reduce its dependence on export-driven growth, and how might this shift influence its global economic relationships with other countries?
Yeah, so there is concern now in many of China's trading partners that the closing of the US market or the rise in protectionism in the US will mean that China will be looking to their markets to replace a lot of the lost sales in the US market with its excess industrial capacity at home. And so there are concerns about so-called dumping, or even if it's not dumping, it's concern over flooding of cheaper imports to the region. This is not always bad. I mean, having access to cheap imports is not always a bad thing, but if there's domestic competing producers at home, then if goods are dumped, then they might lose market share in a way that pushes them out of business, employment may be lost, etc. So I think that's the concern in this region. So they would welcome, I think, this attempt again to rebalance the sources of economic growth in China, drawing away from net exports towards domestic consumption. Net exports has fluctuated quite a bit. It's fluctuated between 10 and 30% over recent years. Last year, it shot up, and that's where a lot of the concerns rose, because as we know, China is having its own domestic growth issues with the softening of the property sector and so on. And also, its need to find new markets for its exports. So if net exports can go back towards something closer to 10 rather than 30, and consumption can pick up the excess, then I think a lot of the trading partners in the region will welcome that shift.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Jayant Menon for joining us today from Singapore and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Korea. North Korea's state media suggests that South Korea's recent joint military drills with the United States are aimed at deterring North Korea. According to reports, the allies staged various exercises, including a naval drill in waters near the South Korean city of Pyeongtaek, where they mobilized weapons like a guided missile, destroyer, and anti-submarine helicopters. The U.S. has also deployed F-16 fighters at air bases in South Korea and Japan. Meanwhile, KCNA has also accused that it is the U.S. that is threatening the peace and stability and destroying the strategic security balance. This comes as earlier this week, South Korea proposed talks with North Korea to discuss drawing up a clear boundary along the military demarcation line to prevent armed clashes along the border. Now we move on to Indonesia. According to rescue officials, the death toll from massive floods and landslides on Indonesia's Sumatra island has now risen to 84 people. Authorities say torrential rains triggered deadly mudslides that swept through communities in North and West Sumatra, In North Sumatra alone, police report 62 people have died and 95 people are injured, and at least 65 people still stay missing as search teams work around the clock. In neighboring West Sumatra, officials confirm another 22 lives have been lost and 12 still are unaccounted for. Emergency crews are using dog teams, heavy machinery, and drones as they race against time to reach survivors in remote areas. And that's a wrap on the China Report. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching World Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. A massive fire has erupted in a Hong Kong complex apartment. So far, the fire has claimed at least 44 lives and has left nearly 300 missing. The Hong Kong police has arrested 3 construction company officials. Two National Guard soldiers were shot in U.S. and critically wounded near White House in what U.S. is calling a targeted attack. The suspect in the shooting has been identified as Rahmanullah, who is reportedly an Afghan national. Following the DC shooting, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that his administration would re-examine all Afghans who have entered the United States during Biden's term. Trump also denounces the shooting as a terror attack and an act of evil. Amid this escalating rift between Japan and China, U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Japanese Prime Minister China-Taiwan to avoid further escalation as per reports. This comes as U.S. aims to keep trade truce with China. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced that more than $34 billion in tax rises. This is on top of the £40 billion she raised last year. As a result, a large hit of growth of living standards is expected. Eleven people have reportedly lost their lives in a deadly train collision in China's southern province on Yunnan. At least 2 people have been injured in the collision. Floods and landslides brought about by torrential rain in Indonesia's North Sumatra province kills at least 28 people, with rescue efforts hampered by what an official described as a total cut-off of roads and communications. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging the Trump administration to reject Myanmar's upcoming elections, calling them a sham meant to legitimize the China-backed junta amid ongoing violence and repression. Now for this hour, we start with U.S. U.S. President Donald Trump has called for a thorough review of Afghan immigrants who entered the United States during the Biden administration. This follows the shooting of 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C., which Trump has described as an act of terror. Let's listen into what he has said.
Animal
who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about, by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them.
In response to the shooting, the U.S. government will deploy an additional 500 troops to Washington, D.C. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has emphasized that the move aims to ensure the safety and security of the Capitol, reinforcing the resolve to maintain safety in the city. Let's listen in.
That will only stiffen our resolve. We will never back down. We will secure our Capitol. We will secure our cities. In fact, this happened just steps away from the White House. It will not stand. And that's why President Trump has asked me, and I will ask the Secretary of the Army, to the National Guard, to add 500 additional troops, National Guardsmen, to Washington, D.C. This will only stiffen our resolve to ensure that we make Washington, D.C. safe.
While FBI Director Kash Patel has confirmed that the two troops were attacked in a horrendous act of violence, but clarified that earlier reports mistakenly stated they had died. Let's listen into what he has said.
D.C., where two of our brave members of the National Guard and the Department of War were brazenly attacked in a horrendous act of violence. They were shot. They're in critical condition.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Matthew Vadam. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Hi.
Hi.
Sure.
Thank you. Matthew, what more can you tell us about this ongoing and unfolding incident in Washington?
Well, at somewhere around 2 o'clock this afternoon, a man walked up to a male and a female National Guardsman from West Virginia and shot them. And initially, there were reports that the two National Guardsmen from West Virginia had died, but those reports were false and were quickly retracted, and right now the authorities are trying to figure out the motive for the attack. But since the person is from Afghanistan and was admitted to the United States in 2021 under the Biden administration as part of a welcome program for Afghan people from Afghanistan, the suspicion is that this person was committing an act of jihad. In other words, was a Muslim, committed an act of Muslim Islamic terrorism. And, you know, we don't know if that's true yet, but that's a logical enough assumption considering that the person came from Afghanistan. There was a report, I'm not sure if it was corroborated, that the man shouted Allahu Akbar before he opened fire on the two soldiers, which, you know, is often what precedes an Islamic terrorist attack, as people in India well know.
Right.
They shout, "God is the greatest," and then they kill people, and God is the greatest, Allahu Akbar, in Arabic, that is, and so that is the suspicion. I don't know if it's true, but it is certainly logical enough that, you know, why, unless the man is just a crazy person and he decided he wanted to shoot two National Guardsmen. But, you know, a National Guardsman is a symbol of the authority of the government, and so would be a logical enough person to attack if you are an Islamic terrorist. So we'll have to wait as the investigation unfolds to find out what actually happens if that person's motivation can be determined. He was reportedly about 30 years old, not an old man, and he was apparently shot in the encounter, but has survived. I don't think that he is in critical condition. I'm not certain, but I know that the two National Guardsmen, the two soldiers from West Virginia, are reportedly in hospital in critical condition. And so everyone is hoping that they survive. President Trump has reacted very strongly to it and said that the perpetrator of the attack is going to be punished for carrying it out. And as a result, within hours, U.S. policy towards nationals of Afghanistan was quickly changed, and they have suspended all immigration applications to, including asylum applications from Afghan nationals to the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised if more changes are made. Afghanistan nationals who were admitted to the United States under the 2021 program, I believe that was under an immigration program called parole. They were granted entry into the United States without any conditions, but also without any expectations that they would be given permanent resident status or citizenship in the United States. I don't believe it's what you call TPS, temporary protected status, which is granted to people from certain countries that are experiencing, civil disorder or, earthquakes or fires or crime waves or what have you. President Trump has been revoking the temporary protected status of nationals of certain countries, and I wouldn't be surprised if he takes away whatever status Afghan nationals have as a result of this attack. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Matthew Adams for sharing that insight from U.S. Of course, that it is, of course, the Allahu Akbar part we are not sure about yet, and there is suspicion of radicalization of Islam. Thank you very much. Moving on to Asia, the president of Taiwan has sent condolences to Hong Kong following the deadly fire in the Taipo district. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has also expressed his condolences over the tragedy, which claimed at least 44 lives with nearly 300 people still missing. She has called on Hong Kong authorities to make every effort to contain the blaze and minimize further casualties. Hong Kong police have arrested 3 men in connection with the fire, suspecting that foam materials used during renovations may have contributed to the fire's rapid spread. Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee, has expressed deep sorrow over the tragedy, paying tribute to the firefighter who lost his life, as well as to the others who bravely responded. Lee has vowed that efforts would continue to rescue those still trapped and provide support to the affected families. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Colin Chong-Yu Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from University of Malaya from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Thank you. Now looking at this, what political implications or might arise from the arrests of these company directors? And how do such accountability measures influence public trust in governance and regulation in Hong Kong now?
Yeah, we have seen how the level of public anger and of course the call for greater accountability and reforms in terms of safety measures. We have seen how this blaze is now the biggest, the worst in Hong Kong's history, and of course it came just days before the territory's legislative elections scheduled in early next month. So this has raised pressure on the administration, on John Lee's administration, for competence, for the level of preparedness, and the complacency in terms of the safeguarding citizens' lives. We have seen how the materials being used and the history of using bamboo scaffolding have also contributed to these deadly blaze, and the level of shock, public anger have also mounted, and of course this will also have a greater impact on the state of the local elections, and of course also there have been calls from experts and residents as well as the public for an end to this long-held practice of these flammable materials being used, and of course the call for stricter building and renovation regulations, and of course this has been a timely wake-up call to the government, to the local administration, and of course the pressure now is on John Lee's administration to launch a full-scale criminal investigation and safety investigation into the fire, but this for the time being I will argue that we will not be enough or sufficient to satisfy the public demand or the public call for accountability, and critics have long argued that there has to be a swift policy change in terms of not only cosmetic changes, but a deep reforms in terms of public safety and the competency of the public officials in ensuring that this will not happen again in the future.
Yes. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, we stay in this news. Meanwhile, residents of Hong Kong have described the scene as heart-wrenching and shocking as families search for loved ones and crews continue rescue efforts. Local volunteers have opened an emergency shelter to support displaced residents, offering food, blankets, and a place to rest. One resident summed up the grief felt across the community, saying it's truly heartbreaking. Let's listen into what some of the residents have shared.
其實我真係都覺得幾恐怖嘅，真係你其實見我應該算係睇住佢從一棟變成2棟，之後而家好似3棟，即係而家好似就都4棟啦。咁即係其實真係幾恐怖下嘅。
個心情係好唔舒服，係好揦住，即係好似即係如果嗰啲網係防火嘅話，就唔會發生呢個情。
你諗下一個屋企冇咗喎，燒毀喎，換轉邊個都心急啦，係咪啊？感同身受啦，真係好難受㗎。其實係個屋企啊咁樣燒咗佢喎，真係形容唔到咯。我諗香港可能開埠以嚟都未試過呢啲咁嘅火喎，呢一下子咁多棟都燒都着晒喎，一下咁樣2棟、3棟、4棟咁全部着晒喎，係咪啊？都好震驚啊！
無論係細節上面啊，即係可能係一啲市民安置啦，或者係究竟係原因係咩咧？我諗可能大家最想知係原因係咩咯，即係呢啲我覺得傷痛減少啲咯。係啊，即係解釋得好啲咯，係啊，即係唔好草草了事，因為始終呢度牽涉嘅唔係1、2個單位咁簡單，係一條村，差唔多一條村咁樣。
Now we move on to our next news. Tensions are rising between Washington and Pretoria. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that South Africa will not be invited to next year's G20 summit in Miami. His announcement comes after the United States boycotted last week's G20 leaders meeting in Johannesburg. Trump has accused South Africa of weaponizing its G20 presidency and refusing to hand over leadership at the summit's closing ceremony. He has said that decision led him to block South Africa from the 2026 guest list. Trump has also repeated claims of persecution of white South Africans, allegations widely dismissed by experts and human rights groups. However, South Africa's presidency has not yet commented on this issue. Now we welcome back Professor Collins Choying-Yu Keat. He is Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at this, thank you. How might the U.S. decision to exclude South Africa from the next G20 summit affect the upcoming G20 and also the global perceptions of neutrality of G20, especially when political narratives such as claims of persecution that are rejected by experts shape such international relations?
Well, this is a tit-for-tat move. We have seen how the U.S. has boycotted the summit in Johannesburg this year, and of course accusing the South Africa of refusing to hand over the hosting protocol to the US during the summit. So all this has also contributed to this sense of tension between both countries. And of course, South Africa has been the voice of the global South. And of course, Trump being Trump, we nations have been well aware of the need to expect these kind of responses from Trump. And the implications for global diplomacy, international order will not be as much as to be pervasive. We have seen how these strained U.S.-South Africa relations are now being confined largely to these two nations. And of course also the G20 has long been premised on the substance of inclusion and consensus. So this exclusion of South Africa for next year's summit in Florida, of course, is based on the decision and in the policy of Trump and Washington, but it might necessarily undermine the credibility of or the intent of other G20 nations to work alongside with the US. Of course, they are well aware of the repercussions if they do not, position themselves in alignment with the greater interests of the US and of, the G20 platform as a whole. So I don't see that to be, affecting the credibility or the impact of G20 as a whole. And the other nations are very much in need of, the impact of Trump's policies on G20, and that this is, an enclosed kind of, tension and issue. But of course, there will be some backlash against perceived, U.S. unilateral move to sidestep South Africa. But other nations would have expected that, and this is also being seen as a warning sign, as a warning by Trump that other nations will need to treat the U.S. with respect, and of course also the international order and the impact and influence of G20 will only be enhanced and amplified by the inclusion or by the impact and direct involvement of the US under Trump. So I think this is a core message being sent by Trump that the G20 will not go forward without the proper and direct support from the US, as with the case of also G7 and as well as the UN platform as a whole. So I think it's a very strategic and move by Trump in this measure.
Right, and what do you think, to what extent should individual member states, even if it's a major country like US, be allowed to interpret or deviate from established G20 protocols?
Well, we have seen, it is inevitable for, other nations, whether they are in G20 or the UN or G7, to not disregard the important aspect of the support and the impact of Trump's policies on these measures. So regardless of the internal mechanisms or norms of institutions, including the G20, the direct deterrence effect, the direct economic measures and impact from Trump's policies will pervade, will supersede the importance of the returns or the positive impact from these institutions, including the G20. So I think this has been the realization being realized by not only the G20 members, but also the G7 members, also the European members, as well as ASEAN members. So we have seen how this projection and the trend of nations getting more compelled to align deeper with U.S. interests, especially under the worldview of Trump, the lenses of Trump in terms of global policies, have been one of the core main essence of the moves by other nations now. So I don't see that other G20 states will protest vehemently or to strongly protest against Trump's move to exclude South Africa, because they know themselves well that this move will invite further repercussions and that it will not serve the greater interests of that particular individual nation as well as the interests of G20 as a whole. So yes, this new model of norms have now been dictated by Trump. I think it is good for Washington to double down on the need for the US also to play a greater role in terms of also providing these needed economic and security measures for all G20 nations as well as for other nations in other institutions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that. And with that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for joining us today from Kuala Lumpur and sharing that insight. Now we move on to UK. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced a big tax-raising budget that will take more money from workers' people saving for a pension and investors to give herself a greater room to meet her deficit reduction targets. Britain's fiscal watchdog cut its forecasts for economic growth for the coming years as a setback for struggling Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who promised voters last year that he would speed up the economy. Meanwhile, the Office for the Budget Responsibility, OBR, has said that the government will now have more than double its previous buffer for meeting these fiscal targets, something which is closely watched by investors assessing Britain's borrowing risks. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Matthew Adam. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Matthew, for staying with us. Now, we move on to our next news now.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on News 6 World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has announced that National Guard trooper Sarah Backstorm has died after a shooting near the White House. He has said that the second soldier remains in critical condition and is fighting for his life. US President Donald Trump says the United States will very soon begin action on land to stop suspected Venezuelan drug traffickers. They will soon expand operations beyond maritime strikes amid rising tensions and increased US military deployments in the region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Kyiv holds daily consultations with international partners to counter Russia's war. He adds Ukrainian and US delegations will meet again to advance frameworks for peace and security guarantees. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will not join French President Emmanuel Macron on his upcoming three-day visit to China next week, marking a break from recent EU-China diplomatic tradition, as Macron will hold bilateral talks alone with Xi on the future of EU-China relations and will later brief EU partners on the outcome. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei criticizes the Trump administration, calling it unworthy of contact for cooperation with Tehran. He has also denied rumors that Iran had sent messages to Washington. Peru's Supreme Court sentenced former President Pedro Castillo to 5 months in prison for attempting to dissolve Congress in 2022. Castillo was acquitted of some charges but faces rebellion conviction. The death toll from the high-rise apartment complex fire in Hong Kong has now risen to 94 people, with 76 injured, as rescuers launched full-scale operations across 7 burned buildings, as early investigations indicated the use of non-compliant, highly flammable materials. Rescue officials say floods and landslides on Indonesia's Sumatra Island have killed 84 people. Authorities report torrential rains triggered mudslides that swept through communities in North and West Sumatra, with search teams still deployed. Now we start with US. US President Donald Trump has announced that Sarah Backstorm, one of 2 National Guard troops who were shot near the White House a day earlier, she has passed away. The other soldier is said to be in critical condition, fighting for his life. Trump, hailing Backstorm as a highly respected young, magnificent person, said that he had learned of her death just before a video call with US troops to mark the Thanksgiving holiday. The incident has shocked the nation, with investigations underway into the circumstances surrounding the shooting.
I must unfortunately tell you that just seconds before I went on, right now, I heard that Sarah Beckstrom of West Virginia, one of the guardsmen that we're talking about, highly respected, young, magnificent person, started service in June of 2023, outstanding in every way. She's just passed away. She's no longer with us. She's looking down at us right now. Her parents are with her. This just happened. She was savagely attacked. She's dead. She's now with us. Incredible person. Outstanding in every single way, in every department. Just horrible.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Collins Chong-Yu-Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst at University of Malaya from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Mr. Collins, for joining us again. Good to see you. Thank you. Now, looking at this, it seems like U.S. will be starting to looking in their own soil for terrorism or terrorists, not elsewhere, not in Middle East, not in Iraq, not in Asia. How did you analyze this situation now?
Well, a direct attack on U.S. uniformed personnel requires an uncompromising response. That's what Trump has stated. When National Guard members shot near the White House, then the government cannot treat it as a routine crime. So the response signals the attack on U.S. security forces, especially in the Capitol, will trigger immediate structural changes. And of course, also Trump has blamed the previous administration and the Biden administration, where this influx of immigrants from external countries has jeopardized national security, and Trump is right to act immediately. So when your capital is attacked, hesitation is not an option. And of course, also this is about preventing the next attack. It's not reacting to the last one. And I think Trump's message is simple here. If you attack U.S. personnel, Washington will tighten every entry corridor that you have used, and this restores public confidence that national security comes before the notion of political correctness. So Trump has very much, maintained his stance that, he is there for the American people. He is there for the American safety and security. So nothing else comes, before that. And his priorities will always to bolster, to enhance, to amplify the readiness, and of course, peace through strength approach, whether abroad or at home. And that this measure will be in place to ensure that the safety of the American people will always be safeguarded before anything else.
Yes, indeed. And how might this death of a National Guard member near the White House, how do you think this will influence public debates on domestic security?
Definitely, we have seen how this has also created this new public dilemma of balancing the need for individual liberty and of course the norms of the American society, as opposed to the need also to restore order, to prevent conflicts or attacks from happening, and to ensure that the safety and security of the American people will be at the core priority of every administration. So what Trump is doing now is to drill down the message that his administration will always put the American people's lives first, and that his tough approach to the safety of the American people and his tough approach on immigration, on border control, on the vetting of immigrants will always be his number one priority. And this attack has further emboldened this approach, and that although he has opened up new debates on public confidence, on the need of political correctness, on the need to safeguard the rights of the immigrants, I think that in the sentiments on the ground and the overwhelming push or intent of the American people to see that whichever side that you are from, the priority has always been to ensure that the safety and the security of the country and of the people will always be the core priority. I think this is what Trump has been doing now, and that his supporters and the party has been fully behind him, and that I will argue that this will see more measures in place, in terms of vetting, in terms of border control, in terms of tighter vetting measurements and controls in the months and years to come, and that this is what the American people wanted to see in the first place.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for highlighting that. Mr. Collins, please stay with us as we come back to you for our next. Now we stay in this topic. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a sweeping set of immigration proposals in a social media post, vying to permanently pause migration from all third world countries and launch what he described as reverse migration. to restore order in the United States. Trump has also stated that he would end all federal benefits for non-citizens, denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility, and deport any foreign national considered a public charge, security risk, or non-compatible with Western civilization. He has argued that only reverse migration could resolve what he called illegal and disruptive population growth in the U.S. This comes after the killing of 2 National Guards by an Afghan national near the Farragut West Station in the Northwest Quadrant in Washington, D.C. Experts suggest that such a move will have huge global implications and affect millions who shift to the U.S. for jobs, education, and also to escape persecution in their countries. Now we welcome back Mr. Collins Chong-Yu-Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs Security and Strategy Analyst at University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. Now looking at this, as you did mention that, this kind of is what MAGA supporters, especially in U.S. politics, are welcoming. How do you think this will be affecting global and diplomatic consequences if U.S. significantly restricted immigration now?
This has always been in place even before this incident. We have seen, the other global leaders have been well aware of the approach of Trump and how his, peace through strength, America First approach has always prioritized the needs and interests and the demands of, securing the country and the people. So, even in the case of Europe, Trump is right to point out, the impact, the repercussions of uncontrolled migration. The influx of unvetted people, the impact on the local societies in Europe, in individual countries, in terms of safety, in terms of security, in terms of long-term, direct impact on the needs of, national security and national interests have been profound. So this is not an isolated incident to incur a much more greater global debate on that. I think that debate has been settled since years, even during his first term. So, in the case of these, anti-narcotics operations in Venezuela, also we have seen how, there's a profound need also to secure the southern border, and that this is an issue that is not only affecting the lives of the American people, it's also affecting the lives of the neighboring countries in Latin America, in Brazil, in Argentina. So the move also to target, in terms of land-based targeting is also a right intended, move to ensure that, these smuggling operatives, because they are evolving. They are not only operating, based from the sea, but of course they are adapting, shifting from sea to land corridors. So if the U.S. doesn't follow suit, cartels will exploit this gap and will exploit this blind spot, and this will also, of course, have this, chain impact on the countries in Latin America. So what Trump has been doing now is basically to send a very strong message that strength deters any intent to have these threats to the American people, and that ultimately you cannot have this criminalized structure to operate freely in the Western Hemisphere. There's a strategic red line, and Trump's escalation follows the logic of deterrence, to act before the network expands, not after, and to act as, to have these buffer zones and preventative actions before any future attacks were to happen. So I think what Trump has been doing is largely supported by not only his supporters, but by the common sense, awareness of the broader American people as a whole.
But, I 100% agree with you that this debate has been started years ago. But linking a single violent incident towards the National Guard, of course, by a foreigner who was supposedly an ally from Afghanistan, but how do you think this will affect public discourse in policymaking and the treatment of immigrant communities? Because, we know that in U.S., a lot of gun violence is not from the immigrants, but from white people. Indeed, especially school shooting. Even Charlie Kirk this year has been assassinated, and the person who has been detained was a white person.
Well, we have seen, of course, also the concerns being raised, in terms of statistics, in terms of the real situation on the ground. Of course, Trump knows better in terms of how he has impacted the concerns and wariness of the local people. And of course, to review these green card holders from selected countries is not, it's basically a targeted risk management. It's a preventive action. It's not a blanket punishment. And this is what, generally the American people, what they have wanted all the while, but, they have been constrained, they have been hampered by, woke policies or liberal policies that are very much, aligned with this notion of political correctness. So Trump is here to say that, the era of political correctness is now over. It stops with him, the buck stops with him, and that, he's simply, portraying, and doing actions that what the American people have always wanted the governments to do, which is to ensure the safety and security of the American people at large, and that to do common sense, to have these common sense policies to prevent things from happening and to ensure that risks are controlled, and of course the interests of the country and of the American people are always prioritized. So this is what the American people wanted and what Trump has delivered, and it's a simple common sense policy by him. And I think largely the American people, and not only from his party, but especially from the ones who have been staying in cities that have been ravaged by all these crimes and these safety concerns along the southern border, and of course largely also in cities which are Democrat controlled, in terms of, like, I can see Chicago and LA and New York. These concerns have been raised now. So I think that what Trump has been doing has been very much a Trump policy, as we can all expect, and this, I think, what the American people wanted in the first place.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Collins, Professor Collins, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, staying in the region, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that the U.S. will very soon start taking action to stop suspected Venezuelan drug traffickers on land. The Trump administration has been weighing Venezuela-related options to combat what he has portrayed it as President Nicolas Maduro's role in supplying illegal drugs that have killed Americans. U.S. forces in the region so far have focused on counter-narcotics operations, even though the assembled firepower far outweighs anything needed for them. U.S. troops have carried out at least 21 strikes on alleged drug boats on the Caribbean and Pacific since September, killing at least 83 people. Let's listen into what President Trump has shared.
And in recent weeks, you've been working to deter Venezuelan drug traffickers, of which there are many. Of course, there aren't too many coming in by sea anymore, you probably noticed that. From sending their poisons into the United States, where they kill hundreds of thousands of people a year. But we're going to take care of that situation. We're already doing a lot. We've almost stopped. It's about 85% stopped by sea. You probably noticed that. People aren't wanting to be delivering by sea. And we'll be starting to stop them by land also. The land is easier, but that's going to start very soon. We warn them, stop sending poison to our country.
Now, meanwhile, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has claimed that his country has been subjected to 17 weeks of psychological warfare by the United States during an event in which he calls on the armed forces to remain unperturbed in the face of military deployment ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump's administration on the Caribbean. Let's listen into what President Maduro has shared.
Desde hace 17 semanas, fuerzas extranjeras imperialistas amenazan continuamente con alterar la paz del Mar Caribe, de Sudamérica y de Venezuela. 17 semanas de guerra psicológica, presiones inmorales, que lejos de atemorizar a nuestro pueblo, han despertado una fuerza fabulosa de resistencia, de conciencia nacional.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Collins Chung-Yu Keat. He's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, do you think that U.S. is again, or Trump in particular, is again outsourcing the problem or blaming other countries, in this case Venezuela? Don't you think if U.S. decides to educate their own public of the harms of drug use, this could be combated?
Well, clearly it has not been working. We have seen that before under the Biden administration, and before that, of course, it has not been working. The problem still continues. The root cause of the problem has not been tackled. The cartels simply adapt because from the seas to the lands corridors. So of course, if Trump doesn't move fast, they will continue to exploit the blind spots. So we have seen how this maritime operations, they only catch shipments of the products, and land operations, meanwhile, they disrupt the production, staging sites, in terms of supply chain and cartel link militias and all that. So they inflict deeper strategic, damage on the cartel. So, and of course, there have been accusations that all these activities have also been, being ignored by the administration. So, and of course, the U.S. cannot allow these narco states to operate with impunity in the Western Hemisphere. So if this is tolerated, of course, other regimes could also replicate this notion. And Trump is simply enforcing the Monroe Doctrine logic to a certain extent that no hostile or criminal state structures can exist near U.S. borders. And this will need to be tackled from the beginning. And if this is not addressed well, then the suffering of the American people will continue in terms of deaths daily of these drugs and fentanyl being smuggled in. So this is only yet another a Trumpian classic approach of protecting the safety and security and interests of the American people first, and to do things that have not been done before, which might not be popular, which might not be politically correct, but which have to be done in order to safeguard the lives of the American people and, of course, the safety and security of the region as a whole. So, and people are with him in this aspect, and people are highly supporting his measures because they are well aware of what previous administrations have failed to do in the name and the banner of political correctness and liberty and of course the rights and norms of conventional approaches, but not with Trump. His approach has of course also been dealt with tough measures and deterrent measures, and this is what I think the American people wanted from the very beginning.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that Ukrainian and U.S. delegations will meet this week to discuss a formula for peace and security guarantees for Kyiv based on talks held in Geneva. In his nightly video address, Zelensky has said that there will be additional discussions next week, including more dialogue with himself. However, he did not provide specific details about the formula or the outcomes of these talks. The announcement comes as both countries look to strengthen their efforts to address the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Let's listen in.
Команда разом з американськими представниками вже на цьому тижні, наприкінці тижня, продовжить наближати пункти, які є у нас за результатами Женеви, до такої форми, яка виведе на дорогу до миру і гарантій безпеки. Буде зустріч делегацій. Українська делегація буде добре підготовлена та налаштована на предметну роботу. Сьогодні відбулася важлива зустріч санкційних координаторів європейських держав. І якщо Путін не хоче зупинятись, санкції не будуть зупинятись. Пріоритети зрозумілі – бити по російській нафті, по російській технологічній складовій, по їхнім фінансам, по їхнім активам, які працюють на російську воєнну машину. Світ нам допомагатиме. Я дякую кожному, хто тисне зараз на агресора, хто захищає Україну від тиску. Ми це дуже цінуємо і бачимо кожне таке. Наступного тижня будуть важливі перемовини не тільки у нашої делегації, а й у мене. І ми готуємо твердий ґрунт для таких перемовин. Україна стоятиме на ногах міцно. Завжди стоятиме. Я дякую всім, хто нам допомагає. Я дякую кожному, хто захищає Україну як себе особисто. Слава Україні!
Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Vasilin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. Joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how do you analyze the alignment of priority or alignment towards ending the war in Ukraine between Ukraine and United States?
Yes, we hear the statement by President Zelensky. And he's very cooperative here with the United States proposal. Obviously, there are points in that list that are not acceptable, and President Zelensky made that clear. Mostly those that limit the sovereignty of Ukraine. Interestingly, the first proposal talks about sovereignty of Ukraine, but then there is a proposal to limit the size of its army, to give up territory, to commit of not joining international organizations such as European Union and NATO, and obviously no country in the world, not only Ukraine. Give me one country in the world which will accept conditions such as limitation of the size of the army, such as not joining an international organization, such as giving up territory. No single country in the world. So why Ukraine should give up territory, size of army, and participation in international organization? Absolute nonsense. And for that matter, obviously, the points need to be redrafted, and they are redrafted with the participation of European partners. And hopefully, let's see the next stage in this process where does it go? What will be the next? We don't know yet. We will see in the next days how the negotiation will continue. But there is a lot of diplomatic efforts on the draft proposal by the American administration. Somehow it was made quickly in the same way that the same people, Witkoff and Kushner, did the Middle East proposal between Israel and Palestine with points and trying the two parties to agree on all the points by redrafting some of them. It was agreed in Gaza, but not between Russia and Ukraine so far. So it doesn't mean that every proposal will work, but obviously diplomacy is important to keep clarifying the positions of the states, to find out what dynamics can exist there. So I'm generally supportive of diplomacy, but cautious that not every diplomacy brings results. And here, unfortunately, we don't have much results because Russia continues to demand the unacceptable. Basically, Vladimir Putin is saying that if Ukraine doesn't give up those regions in Donbass, we will continue fighting for them. And that's not a point to discuss. You cannot ask anything. Any country can say, give me half of your territory, otherwise I will fight for that. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's very clear here. International law is absolutely clear that you cannot do that. What Russia does cannot be done. It's illegal. And it needs to be made clear to Russia.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for emphasizing that. And yes, 100% that, you know, it's very difficult for them to achieve peace right now. But this diplomacy, a little opening of this diplomacy is helping. Do you think that, you know, what do you think is U.S.'s motive in pushing for peace between Ukraine and Russia right now?
Well, United States is Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to make noise. He wants to be seen in the global media. He wants to be on the first page of all newspapers. And for him, this is what he does. He wants to be the peacemaker of the century, you know, to get a Nobel Peace Prize. But it doesn't work that way, and that's why he's wrong. You cannot do what he does and become a peacemaker, because he's not. He pretends to be, and he wants to be seen as such. And sometimes some leaders accept that. For example, Azerbaijan, Armenia, when they made a deal, and he was present at the deal, and both sides, Armenians and Azeri, acknowledged Donald Trump as a peacemaker, but that's not always the case. And in the situation of Russia-Ukraine, obviously his standing is incorrect. he assumed this is a business transaction. It is like buyer and a seller. They have to agree on a price. And it's not about that, obviously. It doesn't work this way. It's not a real estate transaction. It is a conflict between an aggressor and a victim. And all the conflict between aggressor and victim end only in one way, when the aggressor goes home and the victim is compensated accordingly. And in his methodology, those do not exist. He doesn't blame Vladimir Putin for war crimes, for example. He doesn't demand a tribunal for those war crimes to be prosecuted. And without doing that, it remains incompetent and impotent diplomacy, unfortunately. It's a diplomacy, but it doesn't mean every diplomacy, as I said earlier, brings results.
Yes, with that, I would like to thank Professor Popovsky for always joining us and sharing that insight on this news. Now we move on to Central America. Peru's judiciary has sentenced former President Pedro Castillo to 11.5 years in prison. The verdict was issued on Thursday and relates to charges of rebellion and conspiracy from late 2022. Let's listen in to Norma Carbajal, Peru's Supreme Court Justice, what she has shared.
Condenar a José Pedro Castillo Terrones como coautor del delito contra los poderes del Estado y el orden constitucional en la modalidad de conspiración para una rebelión previsto en el artículo 349 del Código Penal en agravio del Estado, y como tal se le impone al sentenciado 11 años, 5 meses y 15 días de pena privativa de libertad de carácter efectivo, que descontada la carcelería que viene sufriendo en mérito a su detención desde el 7 de diciembre de 2022, vencerá el 21 de mayo del 2034.
Castillo has attempted to dissolve Congress and assume expanded powers, but the move failed and he was removed from office in December 2022. He had been detained throughout the trial as the case progressed. The attempted power shift set off weeks of unrest. Protests erupted across the country against the new government and resulted in dozens of deaths, mostly in the regions where Castillo enjoyed stronger support. Last week, during his final defense statement, Castillo dismissed the charges against him. He has argued that his attempt to dissolve the Congress did not have the backing of security forces and his announcement had no practical impact. Now we move on to Asia. According to reports, Sri Lanka shuts government offices and schools as floods and landslides claimed 56 people's lives and damaged over 600 homes. Heavy rains since last week worsened and have resulted in flooding homes, fields and roads and triggering landslides in central mountainous regions of Badilla. Rivers and reservoirs overflow, blocking roads, halting trains and forcing authorities to close key routes. Air Force, Navy, and police are working to rescue stranded residents. The floods comes amid reports of a cyclonic storm called Ditwa forming over the Bay of Bengal. Now we move on to Tahiti. According to authorities, a massive landslide buried 2 homes in the eastern village of Afahiti on the French Pacific island of Tahiti, killing 8 people, including a 3-year-old girl. Local prosecutor Celine Bellacourt reported that the victims include 3 women and 4 men, with all previously missing now confirmed dead. French President Emmanuel Macron has extended the nation's full support to the families affected. Rescue operations have suspended temporarily after a second landslide nearly endangered the rescue teams. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world.
in the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Welcome, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Death toll after the massive fire in a Hong Kong complex apartment rises to 65. More than 250 people remain missing. The Hong Kong police have arrested 3 construction company officials. 11 people have reportedly lost their lives in a deadly train collision in China's southern province on Yunnan. At least 2 people have been injured in the collision. Two U.S. National Guard soldiers shot and critically wounded near White House in what U.S. is calling a targeted attack. The suspect in the shooting was identified as Rahman Nalla, who is reportedly an Afghan national. U.S. takes a reflex action to suspend all Afghan immigration. Ukraine says its negotiating team will meet U.S. officials soon, with Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha stating that Kyiv will focus on specific steps in peace proposals. The United States is intensifying its efforts to combat drug trafficking in the Caribbean, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announcing plans to expand military deployments in the region. Amid the escalating rift between China and Japan, U.S. President Donald Trump urges Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi to avoid further escalation. As per reports, this comes as U.S. aims to keep trade truce with China. Japan, however, denies Chinese claims. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves announces more than $34 billion in tax rises. This is on top of the £40 billion she raised last year. As a result, a large hit to growth of living standards has been expected. Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir takes charge as the country's first Chief of Defense Forces. As CDF, Munir's tenure has also been reset. Amendments have extended his tenure till at least 2030. And now we have some breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin from Sri Lanka. In the latest updates, we are learning that at least 31 people have been confirmed dead and 14 others missing as the country continues to face one of its worst weather-related disasters that it did in the recent years. Sri Lankan President Anura Kumara Dissanayake convened an emergency meeting earlier today with disaster management officials, opposition leaders and senior armed forces to discuss strategies to mitigate the impacts of the crisis. Authorities warn that persistent heavy rainfall, which is expected to reach up to 200 millimeters, could trigger additional landslides and floods, particularly in central and hilly regions. This now raises concerns over further damage and casualties. And now let's move on to news from Russia. President Vladimir Putin has stated today that a peace plan discussed by the United States and Ukraine could serve as the foundation for future agreements to end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. While acknowledging some points still need to be addressed, Putin expressed that Russia would continue fighting if Ukraine refuses to withdraw from contested territories. Listen in.
Мы перед моим визитом в США, перед визитом на Аляску, обсуждали это с американскими переговорщиками. И после этого возник вот тот перечень возможных договоренностей из 28 пунктов. И, как я уже объявлял публично, он нам по определенным каналам был передан. Мы с ним ознакомились. После этого состоялись переговоры в Женеве между американской делегацией и украинской делегацией. И они, я так понял, между собой решили, что все эти 28 пунктов нужно разделить на 4 составляющих.
And slamming the Europe and its allies, Putin also indicated that Russia is prepared to offer a security pledge to Europe, but only if Ukraine's military pulls back. He reiterated Russia's stance that Ukrainian leadership is illegitimate, making it difficult to negotiate directly with Kyiv. As Russian forces reportedly advance faster across Ukraine, Putin made it clear that Russia would use military force to achieve its goals if Ukraine does not comply. He rejected accusations that U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff had shown bias towards Moscow in peace talks, calling the suggestion completely nonsense. Listen in.
Дипломатический язык, потому что одно дело, в общем, сказать, что Россия не собирается нападать на Европу, это для нас звучит смешно, правда? Никогда не собирались, но если они хотят услышать от нас, ну давайте мы это зафиксируем. Вопросов нет. Если они напугали своих граждан, те хотят услышать, что мы не собираемся и у нас в планах нет, никаких агрессивных нет планов в отношении Европы, пожалуйста, мы готовы это зафиксировать как угодно. Может быть, в этом и есть смысл, имея в виду, если мы хотим все вместе поговорить и обсудить, и какие-то точки расставить в вопросах. Значит, мы и до сих пор получаем заходы о прекращении боевых действий там. Войска Украины уйдут из занимаемых ими территорий, вот тогда и прекратятся боевые действия. Не уйдут, мы добьемся этого вооруженным путем. Темп движения наших войск по этим всем направлениям увеличивается заметно. Но вот я сейчас просто не хочу совершать какой-то ошибки такой по количеству километров, но из месяца в месяц количество, так скажем, возвращаемых нашими войсками территорий на всех основных направлениях увеличивается. То есть темп движения войск увеличивается. Но самая, на мой, главная проблема для...
Let's now welcome Mark Sutherland, who is a geopolitical expert, joining us live from London into this discussion here at Newsweek's World. Thanks, Mark, for joining us here. Now, Putin clearly is adamant. He says he will achieve its goal in Ukraine if Ukraine does not withdraw its military. There's a very strong statement being made by Putin once again. What options is Ukraine really left with?
Pretty good to be with you. Well, it's the classic Mexican standoff, and the fact that people could see this coming, if I may say, in my humble opinion, for some time, because Russia has taken land. There's been a million people killed on the Russian side, and up to that kind of amount on the Ukrainian side, with all the devastation that has come with it, and the attacks on their infrastructure, etc. It's appalling. You attack a sovereign state in February 2022. And the negotiations are, according to what Putin, what the administration, what the president is saying, what Russians are saying, is we have taken this land and we just wish the Ukrainian forces to withdraw, and that will then be the end of that. And of course, as Lavrov has said, there's been a peace agreement on the table since January, February 2024. So how you negotiate this is going to be profoundly difficult. Sadly, I can't see the comments that Putin and then the other Russian then made. This is going to be extremely difficult then to negotiate if Zelensky turns around and says, understandably, no, we are not moving back, because how much more than territory will they then take? And also, as the Russians have put forward, to say, well, come under our wing, we will defend you, security is down to us. And then understandably, the Ukrainian people will turn around and say, well, if we do that, then look at what happened in 2022. And I don't say any of this to be clever. We have to go back to this, that sadly, wrongly, a sovereign country was then invaded. The problem is is all then the fallout of that. And you are fully aware in regard to Zelensky, one of his ex-business partners, who then started his production company. There was all this accusation of fraud. Where is money going? The previous American administration under the Biden administration put billions of dollars into Ukraine. We, within the UK and other European countries, have been sending them armaments as well. And I have, on many occasions on this program, have said we want this war to end. We need to get people around the negotiation table seriously for this then to do so. Kriti.
Well, thank you, Mark, but do stay on with us, as I would like you to share your perspective on another key development, this one coming from Italy. Now, a Ukrainian man suspected of coordinating the 2022 Nord Stream pipeline sabotage has arrived in Germany. His transfer follows approval by Italy's top court last week. The explosion severely disrupted Russian gas deliveries to Europe, and both Russia and Western countries have called it an act of sabotage. Identified as a Serie K under German privacy laws, the suspect denies any involvement. German prosecutors say he has been part of a group that planted devices on the pipelines near the Danish island of Bornholm. He now faces charges including collusion to cause an explosion, anti-constitutional sabotage, and destruction of critical infrastructure. Now, the suspect was detained in Italy last August and will appear before an investigating judge in Karlsruhe tomorrow. Investigators have spent years piecing together the mystery behind this high-profile sabotage case. I request Mark to join us back here on this discussion. Mark, now this is a significant step forward in the probe where the suspect has now been moved to Frankfurt for further prosecution. How do you see this proceeding from here?
There's another man that's accused who is in Poland, and the Polish authorities, it's been reported, have not handed him over to the German authorities yet. That is floating there. The bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline was extremely serious, followed by a very well-known journalist in America, Seymour Hersh. So this was then came out. There were many theories. How was this done deliberately? Did various people know about this at the time? And it's extremely serious. So it is this prosecution then to actually hand him to Germany because of the fallout. We're also in this ideological debate where people want to get rid of fossil fuel. The deindustrialization of Europe also comes, and the stupidity of that also comes into this, but also then wanting to frame this whole thing, understandably, as we've just said, the Russian invasion. But it then goes across this whole framing, then there can be accusations on all sides who blew up what, because this is an important gas pipeline that comes from Russia that goes into, then is feeding Europe, feeding Germany. And just quickly, the other thing is that the Russians have said that, or the chatter is a number of years ago, that they'd already begun to slow down the amount of gas that they were then supplying to Europe, which is always an interesting discussion, because as you and I know, we've discussed on this channel, is the fact that what gives the Russians the war chest to continue to their war in the Ukraine is the fact that they are selling energy around the world and with all their ghost ships, etc. So that is the reality. And it was more the fallout of all the accusations of who did it, who didn't do it, and we ended up going down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Kriti.
All right, Mark, and like you did mention about the other suspect who remains not transferred, do you think Poland is going to relent as far as the handing over of this Ukrainian suspect is concerned?
Well, we've just had there was a bombing of rail tracks in regard to train tracks there. We wonder who had actually done that. The Polish authorities at the moment have not. We wait to see if Mr. Tusk, President, is going to be pushed on that. I think it is important that these people are then brought to justice, because the other thing is, without sounding too conspiratorial in my humble opinion, we could end up being at an Archduke Ferdinand situation like the First World War, an incident and then sparks things and then things escalate. I have used that over the last few weeks to refer to that. It's very important that everyone keeps a cool head. But if people have done wrong, then they need to be passed back. This had an effect on I believe, on the German economy. It's not particularly pleasant if someone then bombs a pipeline, as we've seen elsewhere in the world, to stop energy flowing, and then the ramifications then on the citizens of your particular country. We will wait and see. It all depends how that unfolds in Germany, and maybe behind the scenes as well. The fact that Europe is trying to keep a united front, particularly where Russia, of course, is concerned. It will be behind the scenes that these conversations that we're not privy to may be going on. Kriti.
All right. I thank you for now, Mark, for joining us and sharing your opinions with us here at NewsX World. With that, viewers, let's move on. We have some breaking developments coming in from Hong Kong as far as the apartment firing is concerned. Now, authorities have confirmed that the death toll has risen to at least 75. The fire, which broke out at a high-rise apartment complex in the early hours yesterday, has left many dozens more injured, and scores are still missing as firefighters continue to search through the charred remains. Despite over 24 hours of firefighting efforts, flames were still visible in parts of the complex, which houses nearly 2,000 units across 8 buildings. The fire's cause remains under investigation, with authorities focusing on the role of bamboo scaffolding and plastic mesh used in the ongoing renovations at the site. Now, moving on, viewers, the Israeli military has carried out a series of strikes against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, targeting terror infrastructure, weapon storage sites, and military posts. The strikes come exactly a year after a ceasefire was established between Israel and the militant group. Lebanon's state news agency reported that Israeli aircraft launched raids in the Jazin area, hitting multiple targets linked to the Iran-backed group. Israel says it will continue operations to remain and remove any threat to the state. Under the ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah was put to pull forces north of the Litani River and dismantle infrastructure south of it. The Lebanese army is carrying out this plan, but the US and Israel have accused authorities of delays. Repeated Israeli strikes, including one last Sunday that killed a senior Hezbollah commander, highlight continuing tension. Israeli Defense Minister warned that security must be guaranteed or there will be no calm in Lebanon. Gedalia Blum, who's a Middle East affairs expert, now joins us live from LA in Israel. I hope that I got that name right.
That's pretty good. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you for joining us here at NewsX World. Now, I first broadly want to see your opinions on the latest development.
I mean, listen, it's very clear. I mean, we like to talk about a ceasefire that was put in place a year ago, but we have to look into the details of what that ceasefire actually required. The ceasefire wasn't just that Israel needs to cease fire or that Hezbollah just needs to cease fire. There was two other very significant components to the deal, which was that Hezbollah needed to move 30 kilometers north of from the Israeli border, which they have not. The second thing is that the Lebanese government needed to disarm Hezbollah. Those two things are not only not happening, but the opposite is actually happening. Hezbollah is rearming. They're not being disarmed, and their stronghold is being rebuilt. So Israel can continue to follow through with its part of the deal, while the other side continues to violate it. But that would actually put Israel in a much a worse situation, and not only Israel in the worst situation, but also the people of Lebanon, because if Hezbollah gets stronger and gets strong enough to feel that they could actually fight Israel, which they don't feel that way now, but if they do, it's going to open up the war again in a very significant and devastating way for the people, not only of Israel, but from Lebanon. So if it's really up to the international community, the Lebanese government, I know Trump recently today had reiterated the deadline for disarmament for December 31st of this year. And, we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, I think it's the responsibility for Israel and its defense establishment to ensure that if Hezbollah is not fulfilling its role of being 30 kilometers away from the border of Israel, then they become a legitimate target. And if the Lebanese government does not stop disarming, and we see the rearming, we will continue to attack the supply lines and the missile silos. That's just we don't want to, but we have to. And this is Israel's position.
But is it not likely that these further strikes by Israel is further going to deter these Lebanese militants from disarming, as is clearly the case? They continue to blame Israel and US for stalling the process of ceasefire and disarmament.
No, listen. No, I mean, there's absolutely no ceasefire agreement. You could call it a ceasefire, and which both sides decided to cease fire according to an agreement that one side is not fulfilling. Like I said. And so when it comes down to it, by Israel striking Hezbollah, it's certainly not an escalation, it's a de-escalation. It's doing a favor. There's always been a saying in the Middle East that Lebanon would be the first to make peace with Israel, but they have to be the last because they're the weakest. And the government of Lebanon is extremely weak. They've been taken over. Listen, the fact of the matter is, what other sovereign country allows a foreign army to take over? That's exactly what happened in Lebanon. And so we are actually doing the Lebanese a favor. There's many people in Lebanon who are very happy that Israel is striking Hezbollah. This is not a war between Israel and Lebanon. In fact, I believe at some point, Israel is going to be seen as liberators of Lebanon, and the people are going to be extremely happy. And I believe that the people of Israel would be going to Beirut, and the people of Lebanon would be coming to Tel Aviv. I think we're natural peace partners. Unfortunately, the jihad that has come from Iran and has been invested for the last 40 years into Lebanon has not only destroyed any semblance of peace between Israel and Lebanon, but it's destroyed the people and the country of Lebanon. Lebanon they used to call it the Paris of the Middle East, and now it's a terrible place to live.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Blum, for joining us here at News World for now and sharing your opinion. And viewers, with that, we will shift our focus to some more breaking news developments. Pope Leo has visited Turkey as part of the first overseas trip of his papacy, and he has urged the country to embrace its role as a mediator between nations. His remarks soon followed significant talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Let's listen in to what Pope Leo said during the meeting.
Mr. President, may Turkey be a source of stability and rapprochement between peoples, in service of a just and lasting peace. Today, more than ever, we need people who will promote dialogue and practice it with firm will and patient resolve. In the aftermath of the tragedies of 2 world wars, which saw the building of large international organizations, we are now experiencing a phase marked by heightened level of conflict on the global level, fueled by prevailing strategies of economic and military power. This is enabling what Pope Francis called a third world war fought piecemeal. We must in no way give in to this.
And Pope Leo also stressed the value of religious plurality. He further highlighted that Christians in Turkey feel part of the country's identity and desire to contribute their best to national unity. The Turkish president responded to Pope's remarks and thanked him for considering his first visit to Turkey. Let's listen in.
Kendilerinin göreve başladıktan sonra ilk yurt dışı seyahatini Türkiye'ye gerçekleştirmesini her bakımdan
what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you're watching Gulf Today on News X World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has criticized the Trump administration, calling it unworthy of contact or cooperation with Tehran. He has also denied rumors that Iran had sent messages to Washington. Israeli authorities review a deadly incident in Jenin, West Bank, where IDF soldiers shot 2 men following surrender. Palestine condemned the killings as war crimes. Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom urge Israel to follow international law and protect Palestinians in the West Bank. The ministers condemned rising settler violence and called for accountability and civilian protection. Syrian Justice Minister Wais met with a UN team of experts in Damascus to strengthen the rule of law measures and support systems for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. The talks followed by a separate meeting with Amnesty International focused on transitional justice documenting violations and expanding international assistance. Pope Leo, on his first overseas trip, has warned in Ankara that a third world war is being fought piecemeal as conflicts escalate and threaten humanity's future. Upon the hearing, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has praised the Pope's Palestinian stance and calls on peace, while also highlighting Pope's peace calls on Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that National Guard trooper Sarah Backstorm has died after a shooting near the White House. He has said that second soldier remains in critical condition and is fighting for his life. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Kyiv holds daily consultations with international partners to counter Russia's war. He adds that Ukrainian and U.S. delegations will meet again to advance frameworks for peace and security guarantees. The death toll from the high-rise apartment complex fire in Hong Kong has now risen to 94 people, with 76 people injured as rescuers launched full-scale operations across 7 burned buildings, as early investigations indicated the use of non-compliant, highly flammable materials. Now for this hour, we start with Iran. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said that the Trump administration is not worthy of cooperation with the Islamic Republic. Speaking on the state-designated day honoring the Basij paramilitary force, Khamenei has rejected claims that Iran had contacted Washington, calling such rumors a pure lie. Khamenei has also praised Iran's public unity during the 12-day war with Israel in June, despite internal differences. He has asserted that Israel and the U.S. had failed to achieve any objectives in the conflict. Khamenei has also dismissed claims by former President Donald Trump that U.S. strikes had destroyed Iran's nuclear program, insisting the damage was minimal. Let's listen in.
شایعاتی درست میکنن که دولت ایران به واسطه فلان کشور پیغام فرستاده به آمریکا. دروغ محض که چنین چیزی حتما وجود نداشت. یه چنین دولتی در قرآن نیست که کسی دولتی مثل جمهوری اسلامی به دنبال ارتباط با او و همکاری با او.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Alison Nutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how are we to see this Iranian leader, Ali Khamenei, is openly denying that he has sent any letter or any message to U.S., and also he rejects cooperating with U.S. It doesn't suit them?
Well, obviously they've got a great deal of hostility to the United States because of the strikes on Iran to eliminate their nuclear program in June. And there hasn't been any development in relations since then. So politically, there'll be absolutely no reason for him or his administration reaching out to Washington, whether that be directly, which even if it's being reported isn't being done directly, or through a regional ally which has relations with Washington, like Saudi Arabia, as has been reported. So I'm not sure whether he has or he hasn't. There may have been some low-level testing of the waters, but politically, particularly on this holiday, this special day for Iranians, he wants everyone to stand united. He acknowledges there are people who don't necessarily agree with his regime, but he says they must stand united. And he is proud, and he is saying, we have not reached out to the United States. There's still great disagreement about the results of those strikes. The US said it knocked out the nuclear abilities, whereas he says it was barely grazed, it was barely touched. I think independent reports say there was some harm done, but not as much as Donald Trump says was done. So I don't think politically it would put him in a very weak position to reach out to the United States. What for? This was a country that tried to bomb something they have been carefully creating, carefully developing its nuclear capabilities. So politically, he was right to say it would be beneath us to do this. Whether that is true is another matter. There might well have been some level of diplomacy going on, back channel diplomacy, not directly to Washington, I very much doubt that, but through Saudi Arabia. But the message he has chosen to give to his nation on this holiday, special day, is that it is beneath us to do this, and Iran will stand united.
Right. And what impact does Iran's emphasis on, public unity during this last conflict with Israel? How do you think this has on internal political dynamics? Do you think Ali Khamenei is carefully choosing his words to show the public or in Iran, and also he knows that internationally people will be listening and paying attention to his calls or his speech that he's given today?
Absolutely. When the Iranian leader makes a public statement, which is carried domestically in Iran and internationally, that message is designed for audiences both in Iran and outside Iran. So it's not just a message, an off-the-cuff remark. It's not a spontaneous comment he's making here. He's sending a very clear message. He's acknowledging, which I found quite interesting, that there may be some level of disunity at home in Iran, which is quite unusual for a country like Iran, which is not a democracy. So he's acknowledging that, but almost saying, let's just pull together, let's put on a united front. And we Iranians stick together, and we are beneath going to the United States. That is beneath us. So he is putting out a clear message. He doesn't speak that often publicly, and this is one occasion. And a leader that doesn't speak often publicly, you need to pay attention when he does speak, what he says and what's behind those words. And he's basically blanking Washington. We want nothing to do with you. We're very fine at home. Our country may not be perfect, but we are united. That's his message.
Right. And do you think in that message does he include or underlining that we don't even need to cooperate with U.S.? Do you think did you hear the speech?
Sorry, I heard the speech, but I only heard it in Iranian. I didn't have it on my screen, so I didn't hear read the subtitles.
Right.
But they have pursued an isolationist path. They do want to destroy Israel. That's one of the reasons that Washington has the issues it does with them. But Iran does have relations with other countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab countries for sure. And they are developing nuclear weapons, and they are what you call hardline. It's a hardline hardline Middle East state, that's for sure. And ever has been since they toppled the old regime in the 1970s and brought in Khomeini. And it's a very rigid regime and not a very flexible regime. And there's very, very, very little room for reform there until Khomeini finally passes.
Yes.
I can't see any change going on there. So in fact, this message is stern and strong as it is pretty much to be expected.
Yes, and Alison, lastly, maybe it's too early to say, but in your first answer, you did mention that there's no direct talks going on, but could be back channel talks that could be going on through Saudi Arabia. Do you think there is anything that can be done from both sides to de-escalate the situation?
I think, because basically there are some countries in the world that are totally isolationist, like say North Korea, but even they're not totally isolationist. They've sent their soldiers to Ukraine to fight. They had talks when Donald Trump was first in office. No country actually wants to be totally isolationist because it's very detrimental. It's very harmful for the country because you need to talk to other countries. You need to do trade. You need to cooperate on various issues because we're all humans at the end of the day. So even a very nationalistic country like Iran and a very proud country, one thing is what they say, what they deliver, another thing is what they do. I'd be very surprised if talks aren't going on. And as I said at the beginning, they won't be directly to the United States, who they considered an enemy because of the strikes in June, and not only that, and also the US protection of Israel, which is the country they want to destroy. The talks will be going on with Saudi Arabia, which has a good relation with the Trump administration, and it has a good relation with Iran. So for sure, talks will be going on, how to improve relations, but not just how to, what areas, because there's always areas of common interest, whether it's fighting terrorism, whether it's something to do with nuclear, there are always areas where relations can be improved and there can be cooperation. So that's what I imagine, that the Iranian officials, and they will be skilled diplomats, that's what they'll be talking to Saudi Arabia, and that's also Saudi Arabia has a channel to the United States. But these things don't happen quickly, but they will be looking for common ground for sure.
Sure. With that, I would like to thank Alison Mottler for always joining us and sharing that insight from Bucharest. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. Israeli authorities are reviewing an incident in Jenin in the occupied West Bank in which IDF soldiers shot 2 people following a surrender procedure. The Palestinian Authority confirmed their deaths, with the West Bank's General Authority for Civil Affairs identifying the men as 26-year-old Al-Muntasir Mahmoud Qassem Abdullah and 37-year-old Yusuf Ali Yusuf Asasa. Palestine has also condemned the deadly shooting as a full-fledged war crime and a flagrant violation of all international laws, conventions and norms, and humanitarian values. Meanwhile, Israel's far-right security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has given his full backing to the officers involved, adding that terrorists must die. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunaratne. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Now, Professor, thank you for joining us again. We don't know what exactly was the cause of these 2 Palestinians walking towards Israeli soldiers. But how should international law be applied and enforced in situations where lethal force is used after reported surrender, in this case particularly towards Israel and the Gazans who were shot?
Asuma, it's very good to see you.
Thank you.
Let me share with you that in the West Bank, there has been escalation in tensions. It's largely driven by the situation in Gaza, so it has spilled over to the West Bank. And there has been more incidents in the West Bank most recently, but these are very recent developments. We have seen some of the Hamas ideology has also come to the West Bank. But to specifically respond to your question, what we are seeing is that it was a tragic death because these 2 individuals wanted to surrender to the Israelis. They didn't want a confrontation. Of course, there was a shooting. So what we have seen most recently is that the Israeli troops have become more suspicious of such activities, because in the past there has been some incidents where people wanted to surrender and then of course they opened fire. So I believe that this is a very tragic incident, and this incident will certainly be investigated because there's a lot of international focus and spotlight on this issue. The Israelis are fighting a very difficult war, a very difficult battle after the October 2023 attacks, where 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed and another 251 were kidnapped by Hamas and its allied groups. But at the same time, it is so important for Israel to be more restrained when it deals with the civilian population, because if they lose support from the Palestinian people, there will be more attacks and there will be more violence and there will be more extremism.
And is there any political implications of this opposing narratives? You know, the Palestinian Authority calling the incident a war crime, while Israeli minister like Ben-Gvir defended the shooters.
The Palestinian Authority itself is not accepted by Israel as a credible partner. In fact, there are many efforts by the international community to bring the Palestinian Authority as the new governing body of Gaza. Israel doesn't accept it because the Palestinian Authority itself does not recognize Israel as a state. So what we are seeing is that there is currently a debate between these powers, the PA and the Israeli Authority. Certainly both their claims will be evaluated by international bodies, and they may very well come to a conclusion as to what happened. But what is key and what is central is, as there is now a shift towards phase 2 in Gaza, and there is interest for the Palestinian Authority also to play a role, although Israel is opposed to it, that such conflicts do not impact on the greater plans to build stability and security both of Gaza and of the West Bank.
Yes, with that, I would like to thank Professor Gunratna for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Europe, Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom urge Israel to follow international law and protect Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. In a joint statement, the 4 foreign ministers have condemned the sharp rise in settler violence and called on Israel to take immediate steps to restore stability, hold perpetrators accountable, and safeguard civilians. The ministers warn against annexation and settlement expansion, highlighting the approval of the E1 project and thousands of new settlement units this year as an unprecedented escalation that must be reversed. They've also criticized Israel's withholding of Palestinian tax revenues and demand their release, emphasizing the need to support public services and prevent further economic decline. Reaffirming their commitment to a two-state solution, the ministers have stressed that it remains the only path to a just and lasting peace. They urge all parties to exercise restraint and take concrete measures to de-escalate tensions in the region. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, Professor, do you think that these calls, or not just from these European nations, but also from regions across the world, have been continually calling for a two-state solution? But do you think this is realistically feasible at this time?
Two-state solution would have been acceptable before October 2023 attacks. There were many Israelis who were considering it. There was a huge community in Israel that wanted a two-state solution. But after October 2023 attacks, no sensible Israeli will want and will agree to a two-state solution, because if there is a build-up of anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish sentiments, either in West Bank or in Gaza, there will be no security for Israel. So Israel does not want to give a two-state solution. But it is an idealistic view and a vision of a very small number of Israelis and Jews. And of course, it is a concept that is being promoted by many Europeans and European governments, the Canadians, the Australians, New Zealanders. They want a two-state solution. But personally, I believe that it's a question of time that there will be a two-state solution, but not at the moment. Until the threat in Gaza is dismantled and Hamas is eliminated, there will be no two-state solution. Who wants to have next to its own land a terrorist group that has killed 1,200 people, taken 250 people as hostages, and they still praise it, they still love it. In fact, they call it the Al-Aqsa flood, and they are still, there's no regret, no remorse on the part of either the Palestinians or of Hamas that they have made a fatal mistake. The day they accept this is a horrible attack, this is a massacre, and this should not have happened, that is the day the two-state solution is created. So this will need a lot of understanding, a lot of dialogue between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's too premature for anyone to ask for a two-state solution at this point, because the Israelis are not ready for it.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Rohan Gunratna for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Now we move on to Syria. Syria has reported that 9 people were killed by Israeli strikes in the southern village of Beit Jin amid a clash between the locals and IDF troops. Meanwhile, IDF has said that 6 IDF troops were wounded, including 3 in serious condition after coming under fire during an arrest operation in southern Syria. The IDF also said that the soldiers of the 55th Reserve Paratroopers Brigade set out to detain members of the Al-Jama'a al-Islamiyya terror organization following an intelligence information collected in recent weeks, indicating that they were operating in the Syrian village of Beit Jin and worked to advance attacks on Israel. Now we move on to Turkey. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has praised Pope Leo's position on the Palestinian issue following a meeting in Ankara. Erdogan has commended the Pope and his predecessor for their support of Palestine and called his first overseas visit as Catholic leader a hopeful step for humanity in these times of tension. Erdogan also highlighted the Pope's calls for peace and diplomacy over the Ukraine war, noting their significance. Turkey has been a strong critic of Israel's action in Gaza, and Erdogan has also expressed appreciation for the Pope's messages on family values. Let's listen into what the Turkish president has shared.
Kıymetli misafirimizin ziyareti bölgesel ve küresel olaylar bağlamında son derece kritik bir zamana tekabül ediyor. İnsanlığın yön arayışının hızlandığı, küresel düzeyde belirsizliklerin arttığı, Asya'dan Afrika'ya, Latin Amerika'dan Doğu Avrupa'ya gerilimlerin tırmandığı bir dönemde gerçekleşen ziyaretin tüm insanlık için hayırlara vesile olmasını ümit ve arzu ediyorum. Saygıdeğer misafirimiz ve seleflerinin özellikle Filistin meselesine yönelik dirayetli duruşlarını daima takdirle karşıladığımızın bir...
And that's a wrap on Gulf Today. Keep watching News 6 World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching a World Report on News X World. Let's take a quick check of the headlines this hour. 2 U.S. National Guard officials, soldiers shot and critically wounded near White House in what the U.S. is calling a targeted attack. The suspect in the shooting has been identified as Rahman Allah, who is reportedly an Afghan national. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves announces more than $34 billion in tax rises. This is on top of the £40 billion she raised last year. As a result, a large hit of growth of living standards is expected. Death toll after the massive fire in a Hong Kong complex apartment has risen to 55. More than 50 people remain missing. The Hong Kong police have arrested 3 construction company officials. China says Japan will pay a painful price if steps out of line over Taiwan. Labels Japan Prime Minister's Taiwan comments erroneous after reports of Trump call. 11 people have reportedly lost their lives in a deadly train collision in China's southern province on Yunnan. At least 2 people have been injured in the collision. Floods and landslides brought about by torrential rain in Indonesia's North Sumatra province killed at least 61 people, with rescue efforts hampered by what an official described as a total cut-off of roads and communications. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging the Trump administration to reject Myanmar's upcoming election, calling them a sham meant to legitimize the China-backed junta amid ongoing violence and repression. Japan denies report that Trump told Prime Minister not to provoke China on Taiwan. Takaichi said in her reporting of the call with Mr. Trump that they discussed the U.S. President's conversation with Xi, as well as bilateral relations. We're now learning that at least 65 people have died and nearly 300 remain missing after a massive fire swept through Wang Fuk Court, a high-rise public housing complex in Hong Kong's Tai Po district. Authorities say the blaze is now under control. The fire consumed 7 of the 8 tower blocks, which house around 4,600 residents in total. Attention is turning to the causes of the disaster, with Hong Kong police arresting 3 construction company executives on suspicion of manslaughter. Additional pressure has come from the city's Independent Commission Against Corruption, which has opened a full investigation into potential corruption linked to the estate's recent renovation project, citing strong public concern. And now moving on to news from Bangladesh, where a court has sentenced former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to 21 years in prison in 3 separate corruption cases linked to land allocations in a government housing project. The Dhaka Special Judge Court issued the verdict today, stating that the 78-year-old former premier would serve 7 years in each case and that these sentences would run consecutively. In addition to prison terms, the court has imposed a fine of $820 in each case, with Hasina facing an extra 18 months in jail if the payment is not made. Now, today's corruption verdict comes shortly after a separate and far more severe ruling came on the 17th of November, where the International Crimes Tribunal sentenced Hasina to death after finding her guilty of ordering a crackdown on a student-led uprising that unfolded between July and August last year. Let us now listen to the statement given by a public prosecutor after the court announced its verdict today.
এবং উনি এই 3টি মামলাই আসামি হিসাবে আছেন। ওনার সাজা হচ্ছে 7 বছর করে 3 সাতা 21 বছর এবং ওনার জরিমানা হচ্ছে 3 লক্ষ টাকা, 1 লক্ষ টাকা করে 3 লক্ষ টাকা, অনাদায়ে 18 মাস বিনা শ্রম কারাদণ্ড।